If you were a student in the ancient world preparing to be a great orator someday, the first phase of your journey would likely have been to study the Progymnasmata, a set of exercises designed to help young learners prepare for advanced rhetorical training. And for most students, the first exercise you'd be trained in is the writing of fables.
Well, I could have told you that.
What do you mean?
You always forget that I was there. I did it.
You did the Progymnasmata?
Yes, obviously, and I'll have you know I'm a fabulous fabulist.
Okay, well, maybe we'll have you share one of your fables a little later on.
Wow, looking forward to it, bud.
Anyway, fables are fictional stories that illustrate or teach some kind of truth, which makes them a great entry point into thinking rhetorically. You don't actually have to do any research or know anything about current events to write a fable. You can make up all the pieces, but you do still have some rhetorical goal to accomplish, some lesson to teach through the telling of the story. Fables also set themselves apart by generally involving stories about animals, and as Nicolaus the Sophist said, by having a simple conversational style. This is a starting point after all, so you should never feel like you're not good enough to write a fable. The more your fable sounds like natural speech and less like show-offy literary writing, the better. And Aphtonius shares the story of the ants who work hard all summer to gather food for winter, while the cicadas spend all summer singing the days away. The ants end up with food all winter, and the cicadas, of course, don't. So Aphtonius ends the fable by saying, "Similarly, youth that does not wish to toil fares badly in old age." Aelius Theon tells this story. A dog was carrying a piece of meat beside a river, and having seen his reflection in the water, he thought it was another dog carrying a larger piece of meat. When he dropped what he had and jumped into the river to seize it, he disappeared under the water. And he concludes, "You should note that often those hankering for greater things destroy themselves as well as losing what they have." So long story short, fables are short stories with a moral, a lesson, or some kind of truth to instill in the audience. Whether it's about the importance of working hard or being satisfied with the good things you already have or something else. But a fable doesn't just imply that moral, it states it outright. Sometimes you could state the lesson first, and we'd call that prometheon, or probably more commonly, state the lesson at the end, in which case it would be called epimetheon.
Yeah, that's great and all, but I thought you weren't supposed to insult your reader's intelligence with overt didactic conclusions, so why are we doing this?
Well, that's a fair question, and it's a good reminder that, first of all, the Progymnasmata are exercises. They're for practice. So it's not only okay, but it's also useful to try things out when you're writing fables that you might not actually do if you were writing your next great novel. We're usually pretty good at understanding why musicians practice scales or why athletes practice push-ups, even when those skills aren't exactly the same as playing sonatas or pitching baseballs. But then we get all uptight when someone suggests writing something that's just for practice. And I'd be among the first to tell you that putting a moral at the end of your story is probably not the best strategy if you want to publish that story for contemporary readers. But why not put a moral at the end of your story if it helps you to practice writing stories that actually go somewhere? See, it happens sometimes that I'll see writers set up really interesting scenarios in their storytelling that never actually turn into stories and just end up being narrations of characters wandering around without purpose. But if you set up a moral of the story from the start and then practice moving your characters in a specific direction, well then now you're building that skill and training your ability to give your stories purpose when you start writing more complex stories that don't have overt lessons at the end. Or on the flip side, some of the resistance that modern readers have might be to the fact that it's mostly older stories that have morals at the end, and those morals are correspondingly older and may feel outdated. So instead, try moving your characters toward a more contemporary moral and then see what happens. And speaking of characters, fables provide a simple way to get started with characterization. So rather than worrying about all the complexities of human psychology, just start with a couple of animals with simple characteristics drawn from there. So, as John of Sardis suggests, you might populate your stories with noble lions or silly deer, shameless dogs, or simple sheep. Sure, in your next great novel, you won't have characters who are as one note as the cowardly hare and villainous fox that are in your fable, But when you do start writing a more complex character who has maybe cowardly tendencies and a villainous streak, your practice with the simpler characters will serve you well in fleshing out the more fully realized ones. Finally, you can use the Fable as a chance to practice lengthening and shortening your stories and testing out the effects of different storytelling strategies. Hermogenes, for example, says that instead of just telling a story about apes deliberating about building a city, you could write out the various speeches that the apes give as they work toward a decision. What happens to a story when you don't just narrate events, but also write out extended dialogue? And then, what happens when you cut it out? Or maybe see what happens to your story when you add in more elaborate descriptions, or, again, take them out. I've worked with a lot of writers who write stories with too much stuff in them. They write, and then they have a hard time cutting anything out because they've worked so hard to create that volume of text. But this Fable isn't your magnum opus, so cutting something out isn't really going to cost you anything. And at the same time, I've also worked with writers, albeit a smaller number, who don't put enough into their stories. They know in their brains what's going on in the story, but they haven't quite shared that with readers on the page. So by practicing expanding a simple fable into a more elaborate fable, writers who tend to hold back too much can get some good experience finding techniques for giving their readers more to work with. And that's the key point here. We're using fables as a practice tool, like a sketchbook or time in a practice room. It's a great way to develop your writing skills. Because there's really nothing at stake, you're just writing a silly, overly didactic story about a goat talking to a platypus, so there's really nothing at risk. And besides, nobody's reading fables anymore anyway, so it's not like you're going to lose your audience if you write a bad fable. The goal here is not what you end up with. We're not interested in the final product, but instead what you learn in the process. You can write a bad fable and still improve valuable skills, whether that's giving your storytelling greater direction, refining your characterization, or practicing with expanding and compressing your narration. The ancient teachers didn't teach their students to write fables because they wanted to train professional fable writers. They trained their students in fables in order to get them started on developing the skills with language that would eventually qualify them to be great orators. In other words, they knew what we often forget. There's value in practice. You don't always have to be writing the one thing that you think will be your writerly legacy, and actually, you'll probably learn a lot from writing things that have nothing to do with what you want to end up doing. It's like the fiction writers I've heard from over the years who said that the best thing they ever did for their writing was to take a poetry class. They didn't become poets, but that poetry class wasn't wasted time. It was deliberate practice with certain aspects of writing that paid off for those writers' fiction. And that's what I think practice with fables and the other exercises in the Progymnasmata are good for. They help you to isolate skills and practice things without anything being at stake. So while your fables may not be the best things you've ever written, the process of writing them will make you a better writer. At least, that's how it worked for writers and orators for hundreds of years. So go write some fables, whether they're good or bad. I'm sure you'll learn something about your writing in the process. And if not, well, there's a lot more to the Progymnasmata, so come back soon, and we'll have even more delightful exercises for you to try out. So thanks for watching, and don't forget... Yeah, what is it, bud?
You promised I could do one of my fabulous fables.
All right. Well, sure. Take it away.
Once upon a time, there was a glorious and astonishing peacock named Kaput, who was enjoying a life of quiet dignity, roosting in the branches of the most magnificent tree in the forest. All the woodland creatures came from far and wide to listen to the timeless wisdom Kaput intoned from his resplendently golden beak. Until one fateful day, when a sad sack of a warthog known to all the forest creatures by the name Writing with Andrew wandered into the clearing and sat underneath the peacock's branch.
Wait a second, what is this about?
Stay out of it. We all listen to your part of the show. Anyway, the lamentable warthog, abuzz with flies drawn to the stench, belched out an earnest question. Oh, great and illustrious Kaput, all the animals of the forest avoid me, for I am malodorous and pedantic and much too fond of my own jokes. But I see how they flock to you in order to absorb your timeless wisdom and immeasurable grace. You truly are a gift to the universe, and I can't imagine why anyone, even the Grand High Council of Alchemists, would ever confine your essence to a golden artifact. You have so much to give, and everyone benefits from your presence. Well, that's very true and generous, the peacock agreed agreeably. But what brings you to my clearing, you unfortunate beast? Well, it's just that I thought if you sat on my back instead of on the branches of this magnificent tree, everyone would come to see you, but it would also feel like they're coming to see me, and that would make me feel pretty happy indeed. Plus, then you could go all kinds of places instead of being stuck on this branch forever. I may not be good for much, but I could take you wherever you wanted to go. So Kaput the peacock looked down from his branch and fluffed his incomparable plumage. He pitied the warthog named Riding with Andrew, who had...
Okay, come on, that's probably enough.
I said stay out of it. I never interrupt you, so please show me the same respect.
What do you mean you never interrupt me?
As I was saying, the peacock was moved by the worthless beast's desperate plea, so he fluttered elegantly down from the branch and perched on the coarse and uneven back of the warthog. The warthog was so overjoyed that he darted off into the forest to show his new friend, or at least the warthog had misinterpreted pity as friendship, to the world. But that clumsy creature tumbled headlong into a network of vines that became so entangled about the peacock that the bird without equal was forever stuck to the warthog's back, tied and bound for the rest of their shared, miserable existence. So remember, kids, if you're ever tempted to do something nice for someone out of pity, don't do it. You'll just get stuck doing something you hate for the rest of your life.
Wow. So I mean, I guess I kind of liked the part about...
No, you said these were for practice, so you're not allowed to say anything about it. Besides, I have another one ready that I like to call the phenomenal lionfish and the intolerable blobfish. Guess which one of them has more in common with me, and which one has more in common with you, bud?
Actually, I think that's all the time we're going to have for today, so you'll have to save that for another occasion. Let's just thank the people and let them know that more good things are on the way.
Oh, sure, because it would be so bad if you let me make this a good show. Well, fine. Thanks for watching. Be sure to come back for more Writing with Warthog. Writing with... oh, who cares? I'm just sure it's going to be great.